Hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is Sadat, and today we'll be looking into the illusion of leadership when it comes to the character of Don Draper, who's a man who inspired many, but he was also hiding exactly who he truly was. So, when you look at leadership, leadership can take many forms. Some inspire through truth, and others inspire through illusion. And those words right there, they capture the very essence of who Don Draper is. He's basically a very brilliant and smart person, but he's also a broken person inside. Not to mention, he's the main character of the show here. So today we'll be analyzing Don Draper through the lens of leadership theory, exploring how his success and his struggles reflect three key core concepts. Those three concepts being transformational leadership, emotional intelligence, and authentic leadership with ethics. I'll also get into how his story still resonates with modern leadership today, because right now we live in an era where image and authenticity, they often clash and they butt heads. So yeah, let's move on. So the main question a lot of you are probably asking right now, especially if you're not familiar with the show, is who is Don Draper? Who is he? So Don Draper, he's the creative director of an advertising agency called Sterling Cooper, and it's a major advertising firm set in the 1960s in New York City. And basically, it's a high stakes world based on Madison Avenue in New York City, and Don Draper is the leader of that. The way he leads his people is through creativity, persuasion, and most importantly, charisma. When I say charisma, I mean he's the type of man that could walk into a boardroom, light a cigarette, and he'll literally redefine how people see a product. It'll go from them seeing it as an object to changing their opinion on it and seeing the product as an emotion. What makes him so fascinating as a leader isn't just his professional success, but it's the secret behind that success. So a lot of you obviously don't know, especially if you don't know who he is. Don Draper's real name is Dick Whitman. And Don Draper is another man's identity that he stole after the Korean War. So this dual identity between the confident Don Draper and also the insecure Dick Whitman, who he truly is, it shapes his leadership. His charisma, it inspires others, but his internal conflict, it drives self-destruction. And we'll get into that. So when we look at leadership in the context of the show and the character, Don Draper leads in a time defined by image, masculinity, and consumerism. It's an era where leadership meant dominance and not vulnerability. What sets Don apart from his peers is that he leads through inspiration and not authority, which is a big difference. He doesn't manage people, but rather he moves them and inspires them. His leadership thrives on storytelling, which is based on convincing his clients and team that advertising isn't about selling products, but rather it's about connecting with human emotion. Yet, the same traits that make him an inspiring visionary, it also masks a deeper loneliness within him. He hides behind the illusion of perfection, his slick haircuts and his clean suits, but he's never showing weakness. And that's actually a common trap for many modern leaders as well. And that gets us right into our next slide here. So the first concept here that we're going to be looking at is transformational leadership. And this specific style, it centers around motivating and inspiring followers to achieve more than they thought was even possible. And Don Draper literally embodies this in how he turns creativity into purpose. And the perfect example of this is the Kodak carousel pitch, which is one of the most famous scenes in Mad Men. And I was going to play the clip during this presentation. It kind of took too much time, but let me just break down what exactly the carousel is. So the Kodak carousel is a machine that shows pictures. You put your photos in little slides, and when you press a button, it shines a light and shows the pictures one after the other in a circle, basically like a merry-go-round for memories. So most people would just say, oh, this machine shows you pictures. That's how you would advertise it. But Don doesn't just talk about what it does. He talks about how it feels. He says that when you look at your pictures, you remember your family, your friends, the times you were happy. It makes you feel warm inside, like you're going home again. And he takes something that's just a machine and turns it into a story about love and remembering. He helps people see it not with their eyes, but with their hearts. And that in itself is a beautiful thing. The moment itself, it captures how Don transforms ideas into emotion. It's how he inspires the belief through the vision. Another moment in the show that shows this side of him when it comes to transformational leadership is his mentorship of Peggy Olson. Long story short on Peggy, she was his secretary to begin with, and Don kind of pushed her into challenging herself. And, she saw the potential in her when nobody else did, and she ends up becoming a graphic designer and a copywriter for the firm, coming from a secretary role that's almost unheard of. And another side note, Peggy Olson goes through a pregnancy that she wasn't telling anybody about. And when she feels lost after giving birth, Don was the only one who visited her in the hospital, and he tells her, it'll shock you how much it never happened. It's basically saying that he gives her strength to move forward and empowers her to redefine herself. But with all that being said, transformational leadership also requires consistency. And consistency is a trait that Don struggles with. His brilliance and smartness often burns too bright and leaves others behind. So what I'm trying to say is he can spark inspiration, but he can't always sustain it. So let's look at that through the emotional intelligence lens. So the second concept that we'll be looking into, as I just mentioned, is emotional intelligence. And when it comes to Don Draper, Don is extremely highly emotionally intelligent. Highly. Especially when it comes to others. He reads people with no effort when it comes to their fears, their insecurities, their desires, and he uses that same insight to connect with them emotionally, whether that be at work, through leadership, through friendship, etc., etc. An example of that is there's a character in the show. His name is Sal Romano. And Sal, basically, he's a closeted art director. And he's fearing that he'll face discrimination for his sexuality, especially in the 1960s. And Don finds this out about him. He's the only one that knows. And instead of exposing him and, ruining his life, he quietly protects him. He lets him keep his job. And he just stays by his side, which is what a leader should do. And there's also another example. There's a character. He's a partner at the company there. His name is Lane Price. He moved to New York from UK and he has no family. He begins struggling with depression because the company's not doing too well. So Don reaches out, not as a boss, but as a human being, as a friend. And he shows compassion when others wouldn't even show compassion. And this is very emotionally intelligent of him because he realizes that Lane Price has nobody. His whole family is back home in the UK. He has nobody to confide in. So Don didn't have to be that person, but he decided to be that person. So these two moments, they show how Don understands emotion very deeply. But with all that being said, his emotional intelligence, it has its limits. And what I mean by that is he lacks self-awareness and self-regulation, which some people would say are two very key pillars of emotional intelligence. And when I say he lacks it, you can see it by the way he abuses alcohol and he works extremely hard to escape that vulnerability. He basically avoids confronting his trauma and isolates himself completely, whether that be emotionally or otherwise. And this creates a powerful contrast because he can read and inspires others emotionally, but he can't even face his own truth. And that contradiction right there, empathy without introspection, it becomes one of his greatest leadership flaws. So when it comes to just the leadership, he's not just perfect. He also has flaws. So for the third key concept we'll be looking into, it's authentic leadership and ethics. And obviously, as we know, authentic leadership, it values honesty, transparency, and moral grounding. And Don Draper actually represents the complete opposite of this. His leadership is built on an illusion of authentic leadership. So let me get into that a little more. He's basically a man living under a stolen name. He sells authenticity to others, but he's actually hiding his own truth. And in one scene, he tells the client, advertising is based on one thing, happiness. But behind that statement is irony because Don is never happy. He leads through image and charm, but he doesn't lead through integrity. His entire persona, it's a performance. And it may inspire people, but it's built on deception. This raises obviously a major ethical question, which is, can someone truly be an authentic leader if their identity is false? So despite his success, Don's inability to be authentic, it causes long-term consequences when it comes to his failed relationships, his failed marriage, distrust from his team, and ultimately a loss of purpose. So his story, it becomes a reflection of how charisma without authenticity, it eventually collapses under its own weight. So an authentic leader, it's very hard to be an authentic leader when you're not true to yourself. So the main question that I have when it comes to modern leadership is, what can modern leaders learn from Don Draper? So looking at it through the lens of today in 2025, we live in an age of personal branding where many leaders, they craft perfect online personas. They only show you the best side of them, the most glamorous side. And they don't really show you, well, you're not just aware of the things that go on behind the scenes. And in many ways, Don Draper was the original brand when it comes to that. Because of course, he has all this charismatic personality, but what goes on behind the scenes will give you more insight on to who he truly is. His story, it reminds us that success built on illusion, it doesn't last. It's because in my opinion, and according to the teachings from class, true leadership, it requires three things, at least. Authenticity, emotional intelligence, and self-awareness. His brilliance, obviously, it shows the power of creativity and vision, but his downfall, it warns us about the cost of losing touch with yourself. For today's leaders, the lesson is clear. It's not enough to inspire others. We must first understand who we really are. Look inward. So the key takeaway that I took from after diving into Don Draper's character through the lens of leadership can be summarized in the following quote. Leadership built on illusion may inspire others, but only truth sustains it. Don Draper shows us that leadership is more than power or even persuasion, but it's rather about confronting yourself honestly. The most effective leaders are not those who appear perfect, but those who are willing to be real. So thanks for sticking around this long. This brings us to our last slide, where I'd like to close with 2 reflection questions up for discussion. The first being, can someone be a successful leader if their identity is built on illusion? And the second discussion question being, would Don Draper's leadership survive in today's transparent, socially connected corporate world? Think about if any of you actually work a 9-to-5 corporate job, or even if you work a part-time job, let's say at a retail store or a grocery store. Compare Don Draper's leadership to your managers, to your bosses, to your leaders. And imagine if they were living a life like Don Draper, where on the outside they had the perfect example of a leader, but on the inside they weren't even a leader for themselves. So thank you for listening. I'm Sadat, and this was my presentation. Have a good day.